There are phases in life where nothing seems to be moving. Externally, circumstances appear unchanged. Internally, motivation feels muted. The usual signals that once indicated progress are absent. From the outside, this stillness looks like stagnation. From the inside, it feels harder to define. There is no despair, no collapse, just a strange absence of urgency. This absence is often misunderstood. Stillness is typically associated with delay, indecision, or failure to act. In many cultural frameworks, movement is equated with growth and speed with success. When movement slows, concern follows. But psychologically, stillness does not always mean nothing is happening. In many cases, it signals the opposite. Carl Jung understood this distinction deeply. He recognized that the psyche does not advance in a straight line. Progress, in his view, often required periods where outward movement paused, so that inner structures could reorganize. These pauses are not optional. They are necessary. When the psyche reaches a point where existing patterns can no longer support further development, it suspends motion, not to stop growth, but to change its direction. This is the first misunderstanding of stillness. Stillness is not the absence of growth. It is growth changing form. Earlier phases of life are often defined by visible expansion. Learning accelerates. Opportunities multiply. Identity stretches outward. Movement is rewarded. During those phases, stillness would indeed signal something wrong. But later phases operate differently. Once a certain level of experience has been accumulated, further expansion without integration becomes destabilizing. The psyche begins to resist acceleration. It slows life down. This slowdown is not negotiated with the ego. It happens automatically. You may still attempt to push forward, set goals, force routines, recreate earlier momentum, but effort produces less return. The psyche no longer responds to acceleration in the same way. This is where confusion begins. The ego interprets reduced responsiveness as failure, but from a Jungian perspective, the psyche is protecting itself from fragmentation. Fragmentation occurs when experience outpaces integration. Earlier, integration lagged behind experience without consequence. Now, the gap has grown too wide. The psyche closes it by slowing down. This slowing often feels like stillness, but internally, activity continues, not in the form of action, in the form of reorganization. Jung described this indirectly through his work on the unconscious. He observed that when consciousness becomes overextended, the unconscious compensates by withdrawing energy from outward engagement and redirecting it inward. This redirection is subtle. You may notice fewer impulses, less drive to act, reduced emotional charge around outcomes. These changes can feel unsettling. Without emotional charge, how do you know what matters? This question often arises during still phases. Earlier, intensity served as a compass. Strong desire indicated direction. Urgency indicated importance. Now those signals fade. The psyche is replacing intensity with structure. Structure does not announce itself emotionally. It feels neutral. This neutrality can be mistaken for emptiness, but emptiness implies absence. What is present here is containment. The psyche is creating a container capable of holding a more stable orientation. This container requires stillness. Movement would disrupt its formation. This is why action feels difficult during this phase. Not impossible. Inaccurate. You may act, but it does not feel aligned. You may decide, but decisions feel provisional. You may plan, but plans lack energy. This lack of energy is not depletion. It is withholding. The psyche is conserving energy for integration. Integration is energy intensive. It requires attention without direction, time without urgency, experience without immediate interpretation. These conditions are rare in a constantly moving life. Stillness provides them. This is why stillness often emerges spontaneously, not because you chose it, because the psyche required it. Jung believed that when the ego resists such pauses, symptoms arise: anxiety, irritability, fatigue. These are not signs that stillness is wrong. They are signs that the ego is attempting to override a necessary process. The psyche responds by increasing resistance. Effort becomes heavier. motivation drops further. Life feels unresponsive. This feedback loop continues until the ego relinquishes control. Relinquishment here does not mean giving up. It means allowing stillness to exist without interpretation. This is difficult. The mind wants explanation. Why am I not moving? What am I doing wrong? How long will this last? These questions are understandable, but they are premature. Stillness is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition to be inhabited. Once inhabited, its function becomes clearer. Another key feature of this phase is a change in how time is experienced. Earlier, time felt scarce. There was always something to catch up to. Now, time stretches. Moments feel longer. Days feel less pressured. Waiting feels tolerable. This change can feel disorienting. Without pressure, direction becomes ambiguous. But ambiguity is not dangerous here. It is productive. Ambiguity allows the psyche to explore without committing prematurely. Jung saw ambiguity as essential to transformation. He argued that holding tension between opposites without resolution allowed new forms to emerge. Stillness creates this tension, not between options, between old identity and emerging structure. The psyche holds both without choosing. This holding requires time. That time is experienced as stillness. Another misunderstanding arises around productivity. During still phases, productivity often declines, not because ability decreases, because output is no longer priority. Earlier, productivity validated identity. Now, identity no longer depends on output. This decoupling can feel threatening. Without productivity, how do you measure yourself? The psyche is asking that question deliberately. Measurement based on output has reached its limit. A new measure is forming, one based on coherence rather than accomplishment. Coherence cannot be measured quickly. It reveals itself over time. This is why the psyche slows the process. Rushing coherence produces distortion. Distortion manifests as restlessness. Many people attempt to escape stillness by introducing stimulation, new projects, new goals, new distractions. Sometimes this works temporarily, but the underlying stillness returns because it was not created by circumstance. It was created by structure. Structure does not dissolve through distraction. It completes itself when given space. Jung noted that the unconscious often withdraws libido from conscious pursuits during periods of transformation. This withdrawal feels like loss of interest. But interest has not disappeared. It has turned inward. Inward interest is difficult to detect. It does not feel exciting. It feels neutral. This neutrality allows reassessment, not conscious reassessment, structural reassessment. The psyche is evaluating what can remain and what must dissolve. This evaluation happens beneath awareness. Stillness provides the conditions for it. Another signal of advancement during stillness is increased sensitivity. What once felt tolerable now feels intrusive. Noise becomes irritating. Superficial interactions feel draining. This is not irritability. It is precision. The psyche is becoming more selective. Selectivity increases as integration progresses. Earlier, tolerance was broad. Now it narrows. This narrowing is not constriction. It is refinement. Refinement requires stillness. Without stillness, everything blends together. With stillness, distinctions sharpen. These distinctions guide future movement, but not yet, not until integration completes. This is why stillness can feel like waiting without a clear endpoint. The psyche does not operate on deadlines. It completes processes when conditions are met. Stillness persists until the structure stabilizes. This can take time, not measurable time, psychological time. Jung emphasized that psychological time does not align with external schedules. Attempts to impose timelines often increase resistance. Resistance prolongs stillness. Acceptance shortens it. Acceptance here does not mean liking stillness. It means not fighting it. Fighting stillness introduces noise. Noise interferes with integration. Integration requires quiet. This quiet is often misinterpreted as emptiness, but emptiness implies nothingness. Here, something is happening, just not something visible. Stillness is a stage on which deeper movement occurs. movement that does not register as action, movement of meaning, movement of orientation, movement of identity. Earlier, identity was fluid and future-oriented. Now it is consolidating. Consolidation feels static from the outside. Internally, it is transformative. Jung saw this as a movement from becoming to being. Becoming requires motion. Being requires presence. Stillness supports being. This is why advancement during this phase does not feel like progress. It feels like inhabitation. You are settling into a structure rather than building one. Settling is quieter than building, but it is essential. Without settling, nothing holds. This is the psychological meaning of stillness. Not delay, not failure, not regression. Advancement occurring beneath the surface. Advancement that prepares life to move again, but differently, not faster, not louder, more accurately. When stillness persists, it begins to reshape identity in subtle ways. Not identity as a label, not identity as a role, but identity as an internal reference point. Earlier phases of life often rely on external markers to define the self. Achievement, movement, recognition, and momentum provide feedback that tells the psyche who it is becoming. Identity forms around these signals. When stillness arrives, those signals weaken. Output decreases. Feedback slows. External validation becomes less frequent. At first, this can feel destabilizing. Without visible markers, the ego struggles to orient itself. Questions arise quietly. Who am I if nothing is advancing? What do I measure myself by now? These questions are not mistakes. They are evidence that identity is reorganizing. Carl Jung understood identity not as a fixed construct, but as a dynamic relationship between the ego and the deeper structure of the psyche. When that relationship shifts, identity must adjust. Stillness creates the conditions for this adjustment. Without constant activity, identity can no longer rely on performance. Without urgency, it can no longer rely on aspiration. Without pressure, it can no longer rely on comparison. Something else must take its place. That something is coherence. Coherence does not announce itself externally. It is felt internally. It appears as a growing sense of alignment between thought, feeling, and action, even when action is minimal. This alignment reduces internal conflict. Earlier, identity may have been fragmented. One part pushed forward, another resisted, another doubted. Stillness allows these fragments to come into contact, not to be resolved immediately, to be recognized. Recognition is the first step of integration. Jung believed that unconscious material must be brought into relation with consciousness before it can be integrated. Stillness slows life enough for this relation to occur. Without stillness, unconscious material remains buried beneath activity. Activity distracts. Stillness exposes. This exposure can feel uncomfortable. You may become more aware of inconsistencies, of motivations that no longer make sense, of roles that feel outdated. This awareness does not require action. In fact, action too early would interrupt the process. The psyche is not asking you to change your identity. It is asking you to let it reorganize. This reorganization affects responsibility as well. Earlier, responsibility may have been tied to expectation, what others needed, what you believed was required of you, what maintained momentum. Responsibility had an external orientation. During stillness, that orientation shifts inward. You may notice a growing sensitivity to what genuinely belongs to you and what is not in a moral sense, in a structural sense. Some obligations still feel solid. Others feel strangely hollow. This is not rebellion. It is differentiation. The psyche is sorting responsibilities based on fit rather than obligation. Jung viewed this as a movement toward individuation. Individuation requires separating what is essential from what has been adopted unconsciously. Stillness allows this separation to occur. Without movement, you can feel the weight of responsibility more accurately. What fits settles. What does not begins to irritate. This irritation is often misinterpreted as burnout, but burnout implies exhaustion. Here, energy is not exhausted. It is withheld. The psyche is conserving energy for responsibilities that align with the emerging structure. This is why certain tasks feel disproportionately heavy during stillness. Not because they are difficult, because they are misaligned. The psyche resists investing energy where coherence is lacking. This resistance is not conscious. It manifests as procrastination, avoidance, or indifference. These are signals, not of weakness, of reorganization. Responsibility is being recalibrated. At the same time, the sense of future direction begins to change. Earlier, the future may have felt expansive, filled with possibilities, driven by ambition or imagination. Stillness alters this relationship. The future becomes less vivid, not because it disappears, because projection retracts. Projection was necessary earlier. It allowed the psyche to test potential identities. Now, projection loses its charge. The psyche no longer wants to live ahead of itself. It wants to live within itself. This shift can feel like loss of vision, but vision was provisional. It served a purpose. Once that purpose is fulfilled, vision dissolves. What replaces it is orientation. Orientation is quieter than vision. It does not show you where you are going. It shows you where you stand. Standing firmly allows movement later. Movement without footing collapses. Jung emphasized that the psyche seeks balance, not acceleration. When balance is disturbed by excessive future orientation, stillness restores equilibrium. This equilibrium affects how decisions are experienced. Earlier, decisions may have felt urgent, high stakes, defining. During stillness, decisions lose intensity, not because they do not matter, because they no longer carry identity weight. You may delay decisions not out of fear, but because they do not yet feel real. This delay is often misinterpreted as indecision, but indecision implies inability to choose. Here, the psyche is waiting for alignment. Alignment is not intellectual. It is felt. When alignment is absent, decisions feel hollow. The psyche refuses to commit. This refusal is protective. It prevents premature closure. Premature closure locks the psyche into structures it has outgrown. Stillness keeps options open until a new structure stabilizes. Another aspect of this phase is the reduction of narrative. Earlier, life may have been organized as a story, a journey, a progression towards something meaningful. Stillness interrupts this narrative. The story pauses. This can feel disorienting. Without narrative, how do you understand your life? Jung warned against clinging too tightly to personal narratives. He believed they often obscure deeper psychological movements. Stillness dissolves narrative temporarily, not to erase meaning, to rebuild it on firmer ground. Meaning based on narrative is fragile. Meaning based on structure endures. Structure is what the psyche is forming during stillness. This formation is slow. It does not produce language immediately. You may find it difficult to explain what you are experiencing. Words feel inadequate. This is not because nothing is happening, because what is happening is pre-verbal. Language comes later. First comes structure. Another signal of reorganization is a change in tolerance. Tolerance for noise decreases. Tolerance for superficiality decreases. Tolerance for misalignment decreases. You may find yourself withdrawing from certain environments. Not dramatically, quietly. This withdrawal is not avoidance. It is recalibration. The psyche is adjusting its boundaries. Boundaries here are not behavioral rules. They are energetic limits. What drains you becomes clearer. What sustains you becomes simpler. This clarity emerges without analysis. It is felt in the body. Jung believed the body often registers psychological truth before the mind does. Stillness amplifies this registration. Without constant stimulation, bodily signals become audible. Fatigue appears where misalignment exists. Ease appears where coherence exists. These signals guide future movement. But not yet, not until reorganization completes. Another misunderstanding during this phase is the belief that stillness means withdrawal from life. But withdrawal implies disengagement. Stillness is engagement without movement. You are present. You are aware. You are simply not pushing. This presence allows reality to reveal itself without distortion. Earlier, projection, color perception. You saw what you wanted or feared. Now perception clears. You see what is. This clarity can be sobering. Not everything looks appealing. Not everything aligns. But this clarity is essential. It prevents repetition. Repetition occurs when perception is distorted. Stillness corrects perception. Jung saw this as a corrective function of the unconscious. When conscious life becomes one-sided, the unconscious compensates. Stillness is that compensation. It restores balance. Balance is not exciting. It is stabilizing. Stability allows depth. Depth allows meaning to reorganize. Meaning during this phase is not conceptual. It is experiential. You may feel that certain things simply matter less. Others matter more. Without being able to explain why, this is the psyche reprioritizing. Priorities based on survival or aspiration give way to priorities based on fit. Fit is the emerging principle. What fits remains. What is not dissolves. This dissolution can feel like loss, but it is subtraction, not deprivation. The psyche is removing what is unnecessary. This removal creates space. Space is required for the next movement. Without space, movement would replicate old patterns. Stillness protects against this. It ensures that when movement resumes, it is not repetitive. This is why stillness can feel prolonged. The psyche is thorough. It does not rush integration. Jung often emphasized patience in psychological work. Not patience as virtue, but patience as necessity. Processes that unfold beneath consciousness cannot be accelerated. Attempts to do so create resistance. Resistance extends stillness. Acceptance shortens it. Acceptance here does not mean liking stillness. It means not interfering. Non-interference allows structure to complete. Completion will be signaled not by emotion, but by readiness. Readiness appears quietly. Clarity begins to form without effort. Responsibility feels lighter. Identity feels less performative. Direction begins to reappear, not as vision, but as orientation. These are signs that stillness has done its work. But until then, the psyche remains inward, not retreating, reorganizing. This reorganization is a hidden advancement of this phase, invisible from the outside, transformative from within. When stillness has completed its work, movement does not return the way it left. There is no surge of motivation, no sudden ambition, no internal command to go. What returns first is orientation. You begin to sense direction again, but without pressure, not as a future you must reach, as a position you already occupy. This is one of the most easily missed transitions in psychological development. Many people expect movement to announce itself with energy. Instead, it arrives with calm accuracy. Carl Jung understood this phase as the psyche re-entering outward life after a period of inward reorganization. He emphasized that when integration has occurred, action no longer feels forced. It feels appropriate. Appropriateness replaces urgency. Earlier, urgency drove behavior because inner alignment was incomplete. Action compensated for uncertainty. Stillness removed that uncertainty by reorganizing identity, responsibility, and meaning. Now, action resumes without compensation. This is why movement feels lighter, not easier. Lighter. There is less internal negotiation before acting, less emotional charge around outcomes, less need to justify direction. You may notice that you begin doing things again, but with less commentary. You act without announcing it to yourself. You decide without rehearsing alternatives endlessly. You engage without needing reassurance. This is not impulsivity. It is coherence. Coherence reduces friction. Earlier, friction made action feel heavy. Now, friction has decreased. The psyche is no longer divided between competing directions. Division required urgency to override hesitation. Without division, urgency becomes unnecessary. This is the most important distinction of this phase. Movement returns, but urgency does not. This absence of urgency can feel unfamiliar. Urgency had been present for so long that its disappearance may initially feel like a loss of drive. But what has been lost is not drive. What has been lost is pressure. Pressure distorted perception. It narrowed focus. It exaggerated stakes. It amplified fear of delay. Without pressure, perception widens. You begin to see situations more proportionally. Not everything feels equally important. This proportionality allows prioritization to happen naturally. You no longer need to force yourself to focus. Focus emerges where fit exists. This is how direction stabilizes. Direction is no longer a plan. It is a pattern of response. You respond consistently to what aligns and disengage from what does not. This consistency replaces strategy. Strategy was necessary earlier. It compensated for uncertainty. Now that uncertainty has reduced, strategy becomes secondary. Life feels less like a problem to solve and more like a structure to inhabit. This shift changes how effort is experienced. Effort no longer feels like self-coercion. It feels like participation. Participation does not require constant energy expenditure. It is sustained by interest. Interest here is not excitement. It is quiet engagement. You may notice that tasks you once avoided now feel tolerable, not enjoyable, tolerable, and tasks that once felt urgent now feel optional. This is not apathy. It is alignment. The psyche is investing energy where coherence exists. Jung believed that energy follows meaning. When meaning reorganizes internally, energy redistributes automatically. This redistribution is what you are experiencing. Energy returns to certain areas without being summoned. It withdraws from others without resistance. This creates a sense of natural order. Earlier, order had been imposed. Now it emerges. This emergence can feel subtle. There is no marker that tells you the stillness has ended. You may only realize it later, looking back. At the time, life simply begins to move again, but differently. Without urgency, movement feels less dramatic. This can lead to doubt. You may wonder if you are truly progressing. But progression here is not measured by speed. It is measured by stability. Stability allows continuation. Earlier, movement was intense but unsustainable. Now, movement is moderate but enduring. Endurance matters more at this stage. Jung emphasized that psychological maturity is not about reaching a peak, but about sustaining a position without fragmentation. Fragmentation was prevented by stillness. Now, movement resumes within that integrated structure. This is why you may notice fewer extremes, fewer emotional highs, fewer collapses, less fluctuation. Life becomes flatter in tone, not dull. Evenness is often misunderstood. It is mistaken for loss of passion. But passion based on urgency was volatile. It burned quickly. What replaces it is steadiness. Steadiness supports depth. Depth allows meaning to develop over time. Meaning here is not conceptual. It is lived. You live in a way that feels internally consistent. Consistency reduces fatigue. You are no longer constantly recalibrating yourself. Earlier, you adjusted constantly to expectations, to goals, to imagined futures. Now you adjust less, not because you are rigid, because you are oriented. Orientation provides a reference point. With a reference point, adjustments are minor. Without one, adjustments are constant. This is why life feels calmer after stillness. Not because challenges disappear, because your relationship to them changes. Challenges no longer threaten identity. Identity has stabilized. You know where you stand. This knowing is not verbal. It is structural. Jung would describe this as an ego being anchored in the self rather than an external validation. When anchored internally, reactions soften. You do not need to prove yourself through action. Action becomes expression rather than defense. This changes how responsibility feels. Earlier, responsibility was heavy. It carried identity weight. Now, responsibility feels proportional. You take on what fits. You let go of what is not. This letting go does not require justification. It happens quietly. You may simply stop responding to certain demands, not rebelliously. Naturally, this natural disengagement often surprises others, but it is not withdrawal. It is refinement. The psyche has clarified its limits. This clarity prevents overextension. Overextension was common earlier. It fueled urgency. Without overextension, urgency fades. This fading allows a more accurate sense of timing. You move when it is time to move. You pause when it is time to pause. Timing becomes intuitive, not mystical, experiential. You sense when effort will be effective and when it will not. This sensing prevents wasted energy. Wasted energy created frustration earlier. Now, frustration decreases. Not because everything works, because you stop forcing what is not. This is the core outcome of stillness, not inactivity. Accuracy. Accuracy allows life to unfold without conflict. Conflict arose when effort opposed structure. Now, effort aligns with structure. This alignment does not feel like success. It feels normal. Normality is often overlooked, but it is a sign that the psyche has stabilized. Jung believed that the goal of psychological development was not transcendence, but wholeness. Wholeness is unremarkable. It does not shine. It holds. Holding allows life to be lived without constant self-intervention. You stop managing yourself. You stop correcting every impulse. You trust your responses. This trust is not blind. It is earned through experience. You live through stillness. You saw that nothing collapsed. You saw that identity reorganized without effort. This experience builds confidence, not confidence as belief, confidence as familiarity. You are familiar with your own process now. This familiarity reduces fear. Fear thrived on uncertainty. Without uncertainty, fear loses leverage. This does not mean fear disappears. It means it no longer dictates behavior. Behavior now follows fit. Fit is a quiet guide of this phase. It does not shout. It does not persuade. It simply feels right or wrong. You respond accordingly. This responsiveness makes life feel fluid again, not rushed, fluid. Fluidity allows adaptation. Earlier, adaptation required effort. Now it happens naturally. This natural adaptation is what allows movement to continue without urgency. Urgency belonged to a different phase, a phase of becoming. Now you are inhabiting. Inhabiting requires less force. It requires presence. Presence is available now because the psyche is no longer divided. This undivided state is a true outcome of stillness. Stillness was not a pause. It was a reconfiguration. Now that reconfiguration is complete, life resumes, not as acceleration, as continuation. This continuation may look modest from the outside, but internally it feels stable. Stability allows long-term movement. Movement that does not burn out. Movement that does not collapse. Movement that does not require constant justification. This is the psychological advancement signaled by stillness. Not delay, not stagnation. Completion. Completion of a phase that prepared you to move again, without urgency, without pressure, without chasing. What this video has described is not a method for progress. It is a quiet mechanics of how progress resumes after the psyche has reorganized itself. Stillness was not an interruption. It was preparation. And once that preparation completed, movement returned on its own terms. Not driven, not forced, accurate. If this reflection resonates, it is likely because you recognize the shift it describes. Not as an idea, as an experience. There is nothing here to apply, nothing to speed up, nothing to correct, only something to notice. If you wish to continue exploring these internal transitions through the lens of Carl Jung, you are welcome to subscribe to the Inner Shadow Signal. And don't hesitate to leave a comment or share this video. You don't need to explain anything. A single word is enough. Sometimes movement speaks for itself.